The organ music faded into silence. I stood at the altar, my veil trembling slightly as I scanned the front row. 2 empty seats stared back at me, the white ribbons tied to them fluttering in the breeze. Those seats were meant for my parents. The guests whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting between me and the vacant chairs. My chest burned, but I forced my lips into a smile. That morning, my father had sent a text message that still burned in my mind. "We won't endorse your mistake." The words had landed like stones in my stomach. Now, standing here in my wedding dress, I felt the weight of their absence crushing down on me. The minister cleared his throat, breaking through my thoughts. "And now," he said, his voice echoing through the garden chapel, "may the witness please step forward." Behind me, I heard the chapel doors open. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. I turned slightly, my heart hammering in my chest. Then I saw them. My parents, arriving late, had frozen in the doorway. Their faces had gone completely white as they stared at the person now walking steadily toward the altar. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's expression turned to stone. "My name is Lauren Hale, and I spent my entire life trying to make them proud." Even now, standing at my own wedding, that truth echoed in my mind. I remembered countless piano recitals where my fingers trembled over the keys, always terrified of hitting a wrong note. I remembered report cards pinned to the refrigerator with magnets, each A circled in red marker. My mother's praise was always the same: good, but not perfect. Those words followed me everywhere. When I won second place in the state spelling bee, she asked why I hadn't won first. When I made the honor roll, she mentioned the girl who had a higher grade point average. Love in the Hale household wasn't something freely given. It was something you earned, something you fought for every single day. I learned to measure my worth in their approval, in the slight nod my father would give when I did something right, in the rare smile my mother offered when I exceeded expectations. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never quite enough. There was always someone smarter, prettier, more accomplished. I grew up believing that if I just tried harder, worked longer, achieved more, they would finally look at me with genuine pride instead of critical assessment. Growing up, the Hales were known as the perfect family. We were members of the country club, attended every charity gala, and our Sunday brunch photos were the envy of the neighborhood. My mother made sure we always matched, our smiles practiced, and identical. From the outside, we looked like something out of a magazine. But behind closed doors, the truth was uglier. My parents argued constantly about status and embarrassment. My father worried about what the neighbors thought. My mother obsessed over maintaining appearances. I wasn't their daughter in those moments. I was a product they displayed, a reflection of their success. When I brought home a B in chemistry, it became about how it would look to the Thompsons next door. When I didn't make captain of the debate team, my mother spent a week telling her friends I had simply been too busy with other activities. Every mistake I made was something they had to explain away or hide. Family dinners were performances where we recited our accomplishments and latest achievements. Holidays were photo opportunities where everything had to be flawless. I spent 18 years living in a museum, afraid to touch anything or be myself, constantly worried about shattering the illusion my parents had built around us. I met Alex Porter on a rainy Thursday evening when my car broke down on the highway. I had been driving home from a particularly brutal dinner with my parents when the engine started making terrible noises. Then it just died. I pulled onto the shoulder, panic rising in my throat as rain hammered against the windshield. I was fumbling with my phone when headlights appeared behind me. Alex climbed out of his tow truck, rain soaking through his jacket, and approached my window with a kind smile. He fixed the immediate problem right there in the rain, refusing to let me pay him until he could properly diagnose the issue at his garage. At his shop the next day, I watched him work. He was gentle with the machinery, patient when explaining what had gone wrong. He treated me like a person, not a problem to be solved or managed. When he talked, he actually listened to my responses instead of waiting for his turn to speak. He was nothing like the polished, corporate men my mother constantly paraded at family parties. Alex wore oil-stained jeans and spoke in a soft, genuine voice. He made me laugh without trying. Most importantly, he made me feel like I was enough exactly as I was. I invited Alex to dinner 3 months into our relationship. My stomach had been in knots all day, but I wanted him to meet my parents. I wanted them to see what I saw in him. I wanted their approval, even though a part of me already knew I wouldn't get it. The moment Alex walked through the door in his best shirt and tie, I saw my mother's smile sharpen into something dangerous. My father shook his hand with that assessing look he always wore when meeting new people. Dinner was torture. My father asked pointed questions about Alex's career trajectory, his 5-year plan, his investment strategy. Alex answered honestly, explaining his small garage business and his dreams of expansion. My mother laughed, a cold, brittle sound that made me flinch. "How adorable that you're trying," she said, touching his arm in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a slap. Alex squeezed my hand under the table. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could barely taste my food. My parents exchanged those looks they always shared, the ones that spoke volumes without words. After Alex left, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. "Really, Lauren? A mechanic? This is what you're bringing into our family?" The disappointment in her voice was nothing new, but it still cut deep. My mother's ultimatum came the following week. She cornered me in the kitchen during what was supposed to be a casual visit. I had been washing dishes when she appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing that expression I had learned to fear as a child. "We need to talk about Alex," she said, her voice sharp and cold. I kept my hands in the soapy water, not trusting myself to turn around. "You can either have him or have this family," she continued. "Not both. You need to choose, Lauren. Are you going to throw away everything we've built for you? All the connections, the opportunities, the life we've provided? For what? A mechanic who will never be able to give you the life you deserve." I finally turned to face her. For the first time in my entire life, I looked my mother dead in the eye without flinching. My voice was steady when I spoke. "Then I choose him." The glass she had been holding slipped from her fingers and cracked against the granite countertop. Water spread across the surface. She stared at me like I had become a stranger. "You'll regret this," she whispered. But I was already walking out the door, my heart pounding but my decision made. I had spent 26 years earning love that should have been freely given. I was done. The days that followed felt like falling through ice. No calls came. No text messages appeared on my phone. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist in my parents' world. The invitation to my parents' anniversary party, which had arrived weeks earlier, was suddenly rescinded. My mother called, her voice cold and formal, to inform me that my presence was no longer required. My younger sister, Brooke, who had always been the quiet observer in our family, sent me short, distant messages. "Mom and Dad are really upset," she wrote. "Maybe you should apologize." But I had nothing to apologize for. Within a week, the narrative had shifted. I heard it through mutual friends, through my aunt who still spoke to me in secret. The Hales were telling everyone that I had lost my mind over some guy, that I was having a breakdown, that they were deeply concerned about my mental state, but I refused to listen to reason. They painted themselves as the worried parents of a troubled daughter. I was no longer the perfect product they had displayed. I had become the embarrassment they had always feared, the thing that needed to be explained away. I had broken the unspoken rule of the Hale family, never make us look bad. And for that, I was being erased. Alex and I moved into a small apartment above his garage 2 months later. It was loud, with the sound of engines and tools echoing up through the floor during business hours. It was messy, with car parts sometimes stacked in corners and oil stains that never quite came out of the concrete. But it was real, and it was ours. We worked late nights together. I had started freelancing as a graphic designer, building a client base from our tiny living room. Alex expanded his garage business, taking on more complex repairs, building a reputation for honest work and fair prices. We ate takeout dinners on our secondhand couch, laughing over terrible reality TV shows. We painted the walls ourselves, getting more paint on each other than the actual walls. It was imperfect and chaotic and nothing like the pristine, controlled life I had grown up in. And I loved every single moment of it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I wasn't measuring myself against impossible standards. I wasn't terrified of making mistakes. I was just living, just being myself, just existing without the constant weight of judgment pressing down on my shoulders. Alex never asked me to be anything other than who I was. That simple gift felt like breathing for the first time. Alex proposed on a warm summer evening under fairy lights he had strung across our tiny balcony. I came home from a client meeting to find him standing there, nervous and hopeful, with a ring he had saved for months to buy. I cried when he asked. I said yes through my tears, kissing him while the city lights twinkled around us. In the quiet moment after, as we held each other, I whispered something I immediately regretted. Maybe they'll finally see how happy I am. Alex pulled back slightly, studying my face. He didn't say what we both knew was true, that my parents had already made their choice, and my happiness had never been part of their equation. Still, I sent the engagement announcement. I carefully composed an email with a photo of us, explaining our plans, sharing our joy. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. No response came. Not a congratulations, not a question, not even an acknowledgement that they had received the message. The silence was its own answer. My sister finally replied with a single line. I'm happy for you. But even that felt hollow and obligatory. My parents' silence was louder than any words could have been. It told me everything I needed to know about their love and its conditions. 3 weeks after our engagement, my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen, and my heart immediately started racing. I answered with shaking hands. Hello. His voice was cold and clipped. Lauren, I'm calling because your mother and I need to make something very clear. There was no greeting, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of my engagement. Just straight to business. We will not support this marriage, he continued. And we will not watch you embarrass us with some backyard circus wedding. If you insist on going through with this mistake, do it quietly. Do not use our name. Do not expect us to be part of this spectacle. I opened my mouth to respond, but he wasn't finished. You will regret this decision, Lauren. Mark my words. When this all falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to us. You've made your choice. Now you have to live with it. The line went dead before I could say a single word. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Alex found me like that 10 minutes later, tears streaming down my face. He didn't ask what had happened. He just held me while I cried, his arms the only safety I had left. We planned a modest garden ceremony at a small venue outside the city. It had an arbor covered in climbing roses, white chairs arranged on the grass, and a view of the hills in the distance. It was simple and beautiful and exactly what we wanted. I invited my parents anyway. Despite everything, despite the silence and the cruel words and the rejection, I sent them a formal invitation. A part of me still hoped. Still believed that maybe, when it came down to it, they would choose to be there. That maybe blood would matter more than their pride. 2 weeks later, the RSVP card came back in the mail. The attendance box was unchecked. But worse than that was the handwritten note my mother had included, her perfect cursive cutting across the bottom of the card. We can't watch you throw your life away. I read those words over and over, each time feeling like I was being hollowed out from the inside. Alex found me sitting on the floor, the card in my lap, staring at nothing. He sat down beside me, and we didn't speak for a long time. The words stung deeper than I wanted to admit, deeper than I could explain, because somewhere in my heart, I had still been that little girl desperately trying to earn her parents' love. My sister stopped responding altogether after that. My messages went unanswered. My calls went to voicemail. Mutual friends suddenly became unavailable, citing awkward positions and family loyalties. I was being quietly erased from the social circle I had grown up in. My bridal shower happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon. My friends came, Alex's family came, co-workers and neighbors filled the small restaurant we had rented. But not a single member of my own family walked through the door. My friends tried to make it special. They played games, gave speeches, showered me with gifts and love. I laughed at their jokes and smiled in the photos. But there was an ache behind my eyes that wouldn't fade, a hollow feeling in my chest that all their kindness couldn't quite fill. When someone asked about my mother, I simply said she couldn't make it. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. That night, Alex found me crying in the bathroom, still in my party dress, mascara running down my cheeks. "They're not coming to the wedding," I said, even though we both already knew. "I know," he replied gently, "but I'll be there. And that's what matters." I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him, but the absence of my family felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The morning of my wedding, rain poured from the sky in sheets. I woke up to the sound of it hammering against the window, my stomach immediately twisting with anxiety. Then my phone rang. It was my makeup artist calling to cancel. Her car had broken down in the storm, and she couldn't make it in time. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the rain, feeling like the universe was confirming what my parents had always said, that I was making a mistake, that nothing about this would work out. There was a knock at the door. Alex was already at the venue, getting ready with his groomsmen, so I walked to the door alone, still in my pajamas. I opened it to find a woman standing in the rain, gray-haired and elegant, holding an umbrella and a leather bag. I froze. It was Evelyn Carter, my mother's older sister. I hadn't seen her in 15 years, not since I was 11 years old, and she had suddenly disappeared from family gatherings. My mother never spoke about her, and when I asked questions as a child, I was told to stop being nosy. "Hello, Lauren," she said softly. "May I come in?" I stepped back, speechless, letting her into my small apartment. She folded her umbrella carefully and looked at me with kind eyes. "I saw your invitation online," she explained, "and I couldn't let you do this alone." Evelyn and I talked for hours while the rain continued outside. She made tea in my kitchen like she had always belonged there, and slowly, carefully, she told me her story. She had been cast out of the Hale family 30 years ago for marrying a man my grandparents deemed beneath her. A teacher, she explained with a warm smile. A kind, wonderful man who loved literature and made her laugh. My mother, younger and desperate to maintain her position as the favored daughter, had sided with their parents. She had cut Evelyn out completely, treating her like she had died. I became the cautionary tale, Evelyn said quietly. The daughter who threw everything away for love. Your mother learned from that. She learned to value status over happiness, appearances over authenticity. And she's been teaching you the same lessons. I felt tears streaming down my face as she spoke. History is repeating itself, I whispered. Evelyn reached across the table and took my hand. Yes. But you're stronger than I was. You're standing your ground. I ran away and hid. You're having your wedding and living your truth. I'm so proud of you, Lauren. Those words, "I'm so proud of you," spoken without conditions or qualifications, broke something open inside me. I cried into her shoulder like a child, mourning the parents I had always wanted but never had. As the rain began to clear, I looked at Evelyn with a sudden, overwhelming certainty. "Will you be my witness?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Will you stand up there with me?" Evelyn's eyes immediately filled with tears. She set down her teacup carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "Lauren," she said slowly, "if I do this, your mother will never forgive me. She'll never speak to me again. She hasn't spoken to you in 30 years, I pointed out gently. "I know," Evelyn replied, "but this makes it final. This closes a door that a small part of me always hoped might reopen someday." I understood what I was asking her to sacrifice. That tiny hope of reconciliation, that possibility that somehow, someday, things might be different. I was asking her to choose me over that hope. "You don't have to," I said quickly. "I understand if it's too much." But Evelyn was already nodding, tears streaming down her face. "Of course I'll do it. I'd be honored." She pulled me into a fierce hug. "Your mother may hate this," she whispered against my hair, "but that's not your burden to carry. You're reclaiming your voice, Lauren. Don't ever let anyone silence it again." The decision felt monumental and terrifying and absolutely right. For once in my life, I was choosing what I needed, not what my parents wanted. By the time we arrived at the venue, the rain had cleared completely. The sun broke through the clouds, casting everything in gold light. Water droplets clung to the rose petals on the arbor, sparkling like diamonds. Guests filled the white chairs, their faces bright with anticipation and support. I stood in the small preparation room, my hands trembling as I adjusted my veil. Through the window, I could see Alex standing at the altar with the minister, his face nervous and excited. The music began. My heart hammered in my chest. I stepped out, my hand resting lightly on Evelyn's arm as she walked me down the aisle. Every step felt surreal, like walking through a dream. Alex's face, when he saw me, made everything worth it. His eyes filled with tears, and he smiled so wide I thought my heart might burst. The minister began the ceremony. I held Alex's hands, squeezing them tight, trying to stay present in the moment. But my eyes kept drifting to those empty seats in the front row. The white ribbons fluttered in the breeze. Part of me still hoped, foolishly, that maybe they would change their minds. That maybe they would realize what they were missing and come anyway. I forced myself to look away, to focus on Alex, on the man who had chosen me exactly as I was. Halfway through the vase, I felt my maid of honor shift beside me. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "Your phone buzzed." My heart sank. I knew before she even showed me the screen. My father had sent a text message. "We won't come. You chose wrong. Don't expect us to fix this when it falls apart." The words blurred in front of my eyes. My hands started to shake. Alex noticed immediately, his brow furrowing with concern. He squeezed my hands gently, grounding me. I exhaled shakily, forcing my lips to curve into something resembling a smile. "Then they'll have to watch from afar," I whispered back to my maid of honor, more to myself than anyone else. I handed the phone back and turned my full attention to Alex. To this moment, to the life we were choosing together. My parents had made their decision. Now I had to make mine. I chose to be present. I chose to say my vows with my full heart. I chose to believe that love didn't have to be earned or performed or conditional. As I spoke my promises to Alex, my voice grew steadier with each word. I was building something new, something better than what I had grown up with. I was breaking a cycle. And I was doing it in front of everyone, including the 2 empty seats that represented everything I was leaving behind. The minister had just asked Alex to recite his vows when I heard the whispers start. A murmur rippled through the crowd, people turning in their seats to look toward the back. I felt it before I saw it, that familiar tension, that shift in the air that always preceded my parents' arrival. 2 silhouettes appeared in the doorway of the garden chapel. Backlit by the afternoon sun, I couldn't see their faces at first. But I knew. My whole body knew. My mother stood there in a designer dress, her face carefully composed. My father beside her, wearing his expensive suit, his expression unreadable. They hadn't been able to stay away. Not because they supported me, not because they had changed their minds, but because they couldn't stand being left out of the spectacle. They couldn't tolerate the gossip that would follow if people knew they had missed their own daughter's wedding. This was about appearances just like everything else with them. The guests whispered louder now, their eyes darting between me and my parents. I felt Alex's hands tighten around mine. He leaned in close. "Do you want to stop?" he asked quietly. I kept my eyes forward, my jaw set. "No," I replied. "Let them watch." They had come to observe, to judge, to maintain their image. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of disrupting this moment. I wouldn't let them make this about them. Alex finished his vows, his voice thick with emotion. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they were good tears, honest tears. The minister smiled at both of us, clearly moved by the ceremony despite the tension in the air. "The vows have been spoken," he announced to the gathered crowd. "The rings have been exchanged. And now, before we proceed to the final pronouncement, may the witness please come forward to sign the marriage certificate." I felt every eye in the garden turn toward Evelyn. She stood from her seat in the second row, elegant in her simple blue dress. The whispers grew louder as she walked slowly down the aisle, her head held high. I watched my mother's face as recognition dawned. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with shock and something that looked like betrayal. My father's expression turned to stone, his jaw clenching so hard I could see the muscle jump from where I stood. Evelyn reached the altar and took her place beside the minister. The whispers had become a dull roar of speculation. The minister, bless him, maintained his professional composure. He held up his hand for silence, and the garden gradually quieted. For those who may not know, he announced clearly, "Our witness today is Ms. Evelyn Carter." He paused, then added, "Sister of the bride's mother." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The crowd murmured with renewed intensity. I watched the realization spread through the guests like wildfire. My mother's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The country club crowd exchanged knowing glances. The Hale's carefully constructed image was cracking in real time, right here in front of everyone they had spent decades trying to impress. My mother's hand remained frozen over her mouth. I saw her eyes fill with tears, but whether they were from shock, anger, or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. My father's face had drained of all color. His hands gripped the back of the chair in front of him so tightly his knuckles were white. This wasn't just about me choosing Alex anymore. This was about their past coming back to haunt them. This was about the sister they had exiled, the daughter they had written off, standing here as a witness to the fact that history had indeed repeated itself. And they had learned nothing. Evelyn signed the marriage certificate with steady hands. Her signature was clear and bold. She looked up at me and smiled, and in that smile was 30 years of vindication, of choosing love over status, of surviving despite being cast out. The minister continued with the ceremony, but I barely heard the words. I was watching my parents, watching them realize that they had lost, that their power over me was broken, that I had found family in the place they least expected. The ceremony concluded with applause and cheers. Alex kissed me, and for a moment, everything else faded away. We were married. Despite everything, despite the absence and the cruelty and the judgment, we had done it. We walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, passing my parents who still stood frozen at the back. I didn't look at them. I looked at our friends, at Alex's family, at the people who had chosen to show up and celebrate with us. The reception was held in the garden pavilion adjacent to the chapel. Music played, people danced, laughter filled the air. I was talking with friends when I heard raised voices near the entrance. I turned to see my parents cornering Evelyn near the gift table. My mother's carefully composed mask had slipped. She was hissing accusations, her face twisted with anger. My father stood beside her, backing her up with his presence. I started to move toward them, but Evelyn saw me and subtly shook her head. She could handle this. "You raised her to chase approval," Evelyn said, her voice calm and steady despite the venom being directed at her. "You made her believe love was something she had to earn. She chose love instead. Real love, unconditional love. And you can't stand it because it reveals everything wrong with how you've lived your own lives." I stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down my face as I heard every word. The guests around us had fallen silent, everyone pretending not to watch, but absolutely watching. My mother looked around and seemed to realize, for the first time, how public this confrontation had become. She straightened her dress, trying to regain her composure. "We should discuss this privately," she said, her voice strained. "Like family." "We're not family," Evelyn replied quietly. "You made that very clear 30 years ago, just like you made it clear to Lauren. You only know how to love people who make you look good." My father finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You have no right to judge us. You abandoned this family. You chose some nobody over your own blood." "I chose happiness," Evelyn corrected. "And I'd make the same choice again." She looked past them to where I stood. "Lauren is 10 times the woman either of you could ever be. She's brave enough to choose love over appearances. That's something neither of you understand." The whispers spread through the reception like a wave. I saw my mother's friends, the country club wives who had always envied and admired her, exchanging glances. I saw the calculation in their eyes as they reassessed the perfect Hale family image. Years of my parents' carefully maintained reputation fracturing in real time, and I hadn't even had to say a word. After Evelyn walked away, my mother tried to pull me aside. Her hand gripped my elbow as I passed, her manicured nails digging in slightly. "Lauren, we need to talk."
Now.
I stopped and turned to face her. Really face her, not as a child seeking approval, but as an adult who had finally learned her worth. "You humiliated us," she hissed, keeping her voice low so others wouldn't hear. "Bringing Evelyn here, making her your witness. You knew exactly what you were doing. You did this to hurt us." I looked at her with calm, quiet resolve. The words came easier than I expected.
No, Mom.
"You did that when you refused to love me unless I played your part. When you made me believe I wasn't enough just as I was. When you chose your image over your daughter." People nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. I could feel their attention, their support, their witness to this moment. My mother's face went pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. "I spent 26 years trying to earn love that should have been free. I'm done. I choose people who choose me back, who don't make me prove I'm worth caring about. I hope someday you understand what you've lost." I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard applause. Soft at first, then growing louder. My friends, Alex's family, even some people I barely knew were clapping. The sound drowned out whatever my mother said next. Months passed like water flowing downhill, steady and unstoppable. Alex and I settled into married life, with an ease that surprised us both. My freelance business expanded beyond anything I had imagined. I was no longer working to prove myself or chase some impossible standard. I was working because I loved it, and that freedom showed in everything I created. Evelyn became a regular presence in our lives. She visited often, bringing wine and stories, filling the ant-shaped hole I hadn't realized existed. She taught me about her life, about the 30 years she had lived authentically despite being cast out. She introduced me to her husband, a gentle man who loved books and made terrible jokes. They had built a beautiful life together, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection. My parents tried to reach out exactly twice. Once through my sister, who called asking if I would consider smoothing things over for the sake of family. I told her gently but firmly that I was done being the one who compromised. That if Mom and Dad wanted a relationship, they needed to take the first step, and it needed to be genuine. The second time was an email from my father, formal and cold, suggesting we meet to discuss terms of re-establishing contact. Terms. Like our relationship was a business negotiation. I deleted it without responding. The silence I gave them felt different from their silence toward me. Mine was peaceful, not vengeful. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just free. A year after the wedding, a mutual friend sent me a photo with a simple message. "Thought you should know." The image showed a real estate sign planted in the lawn of my childhood home. The pristine colonial with the manicured garden and the country club view was for sale. My friend's message continued. "I heard they're downsizing. Money problems, and the social circle kind of fell apart after the wedding." I stared at that photo for a long time. The house where I had spent 18 years trying to be perfect. The place where I had learned that love was conditional and worth was measured in achievements and appearances. Their perfect life was crumbling quietly, not with any dramatic revenge on my part, but simply because the foundation it was built on had always been hollow. I closed my phone and looked up at Alex, who was cooking dinner in our small kitchen, humming along to the radio. On our wall hung our wedding photo, beautifully framed. Evelyn stood beside us in the picture, pen in hand, signing as our witness. I walked over to Alex and wrapped my arms around him from behind. "I love you," I said simply. "I love you too," he replied, turning to kiss me. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect." And it was. I used to think love had to be earned, that I had to constantly prove I deserved it. It took losing my parents to learn the truth. The people worth keeping never make you prove you deserve their love. They just give it, freely and completely, because that's what real love does.